The island of Malta had stopped sleeping long before the autumn of 1942. Every night, the air trembled with the low hum of approaching engines, German bombers flying from Sicily, their silver bellies glowing faintly under the moon. Beneath them, anti-aircraft guns lit up the black sky like fireworks from hell. In that chaos, the pilots of the RAF's number 1435 squadron waited for the call. They were young, underfed, their uniforms stained with oil and salt, their eyes ringed with sleeplessness. But they flew anyway, always into fire, always back into the night. Among them was Flight Lieutenant Alan Reed Morrison, 25, from Kent, a quiet man who kept a small notebook in his breast pocket filled with coordinates, sketches of cloud formations, and, curiously, unfinished prayers. His squadron operated out of Ta Kali airfield, a scar of rock and dust carved into Malta's spine. By September, Reed's squadron was down to 6 operational Spitfires, and fuel was rationed to the last drop. Each sortie meant gambling with death and gravity in equal measure. On the night of September 18th, a message came through the base radio. A Luftwaffe formation sighted over the central Mediterranean, inbound. Reed and 2 others, Harris and Boyd, were scrambled. The engines roared against the wind as their Spitfires took off into darkness, climbing toward invisible targets. Over the radio, voices crackled, fragments of bearings, altitude calls, static. The radar room lost them at 2247. Then, silence. No response to base contact, no transponders, nothing but sea and night. Searchlights scanned the coastline for hours, but the sky had already swallowed them. By dawn, command declared them presumed missing. 3 names added to the growing list. Reed's bunk was left untouched, his notebook sitting on the pillow, its last page blank. But then, 2 nights later, something impossible happened. At precisely 23:03, radar picked up 3 aircraft signatures approaching from the north. Same altitude, same vector as Reed's flight path. The control tower called out, thinking it was a friendly patrol returning late. But there had been no scheduled flights that night. The radar operator swore he could hear faint engine noise, distant but real, somewhere above the clouds. Spotlights swept the sky, but the night was empty. Still, the radio flickered, a burst of static, and then, faintly, Reed's voice. Bandits sighted, engaging. Then it was gone. The operators looked at one another. The log clerk hesitated, pen hovering. The call sign matched. But that was impossible. The wreckage of Reed's flight had been found that afternoon, 20 miles west of Gozo. All 3 aircraft destroyed, their bodies unrecoverable. The next day, a mechanic swore he saw a Spitfire glide silently over the runway at dawn, its landing lights blinking once before vanishing into cloud. The base chaplain called it mass fatigue. The men called it something else, the Ghost Patrol. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Malta's airfield settled into its uneasy rhythm of waiting for death between sorties. Pilots slept in shifts beneath tarps, engineers stripped wrecks for parts, and the chaplain read psalms that nobody really believed in anymore. But the talk of Reed's patrol wouldn't die. There were rumors that locals had seen flames that didn't burn moving over the sea at night, like lanterns drifting too far from shore. Sergeant McCallan, the radar operator who had first logged the phantom signal, couldn't shake it. He replayed the transmission again and again on the field's clattering receiver, filtering the static through analog switches. Each time, the same phrase returned, faint, distorted, but undeniably human. Bandits sighted. The signal had no source, no traceable frequency. It came from nowhere, then vanished. Command dismissed it as feedback from Axis jammers, but something gnawed at the edges of logic. On the night of October 3rd, an RAF Beaufighter patrol reported 3 unidentified aircraft flying parallel to their route north of Malta. Formation flying, tight and disciplined, no lights, no radio. When the Beaufighter attempted to close in, the blips on radar simply faded, as if swallowed by the sea. Back at Ta Kali, pilots whispered that Reed's patrol hadn't gone down, that they'd kept fighting somewhere beyond sight, locked in an endless dogfight between worlds. Morrison's notebook, retrieved from his bunk, became an obsession for the intelligence officer assigned to the case. On one page, amid weather data and fuel notes, were 4 words: "The sky remembers us." Every night, the squadron still in operation launched sorties. They would climb into the cold blue-black void, engines howling, stars scattering like shell casings. The Mediterranean below was a mirror of death, beautiful, endless, indifferent. Yet sometimes, just as dawn broke, pilots reported seeing flashes to the north. Brief, precise bursts of light, too ordered to be lightning. "Like tracer fire," one said. On October 8th, Wing Commander Fielding ordered a test. 2 radar units were synchronized, one at Ta Kali, one at Lucca Airfield, 20 kilometers apart. They recorded independently from midnight to 0400 hours. When the logs were compared the next morning, both showed the same anomaly. 3 contacts appearing at 23:03, following a precise vector, identical to Reed's last flight path, and then disappearing exactly after 4 minutes and 27 seconds. That night, the chaplain left a lantern burning on the runway. He said it was for the ones still flying. The next morning, the glass was cracked, the fuel half drained, and a single handprint marked the edge of the lantern in dried salt. The military report claimed it was condensation from sea air. The men at the airfield stopped laughing after that. By mid-October, the phenomenon was being referred to quietly in signals logs as echo flight. Unofficially, it was a superstition. But to those who heard Reed's voice through the static, it was something more. They began to say that every night the sea called its pilots home, but the sky refused to give them back. By late October, the island's exhaustion had turned into superstition. Men refused to fly night patrols that crossed the northern corridor, Reed's old vector. Even the ground crews muttered prayers before checking the Spitfires, touching the fuselage like a talisman. The chaplain, Father Hargreaves, began keeping a private log of strange reports: shadows crossing the runway after midnight, the faint smell of aviation fuel drifting inland when no planes were airborne, a faraway engine hum that made dogs bark along the coast. Most of the officers dismissed it as nerves, the kind of madness that came with too many raids and too little rest. But some things could not be explained away. On November the 2nd, the night operators picked up a long-range broadcast on an obsolete emergency channel, one that had been deactivated months earlier. The signal was faint, layered with static, but the voice was unmistakably British. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Falcon 3, low on fuel, descending through cloud cover. Position." The rest was lost in interference. The coordinates that followed, when decoded, pointed directly to the stretch of sea where Reed's flight had vanished 6 weeks before. For a moment, the command center froze. The transmission was time-stamped precisely 23:03, the exact minute of every previous radar appearance. A rescue Catalina was launched before dawn. The air was calm, the sea like glass, but the coordinates yielded nothing. No debris, no oil, no survivors. Still, the navigator swore he saw something on the water's surface. 3 faint wakes, perfectly parallel, fading into the fog. When he tried to mark the position, the compass needle spun wildly, the radio cut to static, and the aircraft's engine coughed once before recovering. Back at base, the crew refused to talk about what they'd seen. The flight log was stamped instrumental malfunction. 3 nights later, an American convoy approaching Grand Harbor reported 3 unidentified aircraft circling above them, flying in formation with no running lights. 1 destroyer signaled recognition codes. No reply. The planes banked once, then disappeared into low cloud. The radar operator aboard HMS Penn recorded it all, but when the data was transferred to command, the file was corrupted, wiped clean except for 1 phrase that reappeared across the tape: "The sky remembers us." By then, even the skeptics stopped arguing. The mechanics began to leave small offerings on the airfield edge: spare rounds, flight badges, torn pieces of maps. Some nights, pilots would claim they saw lights drifting high above the island, 3 in perfect line, moving silently against the wind. The locals said the spirits of Reed and his men were still fighting their last battle somewhere between heaven and sea, bound to Malta like the island's own curse. At 23:03 every night, Ta Kali Airfield would go still. The radar screens flickered once, and for 4 minutes there was always something in the sky, unseen, unconfirmed, and unexplainable. On the night of November 10th, the island was wrapped in storm. Thunder rolled across the Mediterranean like artillery, and waves crashed so hard against the limestone cliffs that they sounded like detonations. All flights were grounded. The men sheltered in the hangars, oil lamps flickering against the corrugated walls. Yet, even over the wind, the radio began to crackle. First static, then faint Morse, weak but deliberate. The operator on duty, Corporal Ellis, frowned and scribbled down the code. It was short, clean, familiar. FALCON3, returning to base. His pen froze mid-stroke. Falcon 3 was Reed's call sign. At first, they thought it was interference, a signal bouncing from somewhere in North Africa. But the frequency was wrong, and the origin direction pointed straight over the Central Sea. Ellis stared at the green radar scope. 3 dots, moving slow, steady, inbound. Lightning illuminated the horizon, and through the sheets of rain, one of the spotters swore he saw something. Faint navigation lights sweeping low over the water, maybe half a mile off the coast. They flickered once, twice, then vanished. Ellis shouted into the microphone, "Identify! Identify!" The only reply was a burst of static followed by Reed's clipped voice, barely audible. "Runway lights, request landing." Against orders, Ellis ran to the hangar control. "They're coming in," he yelled. The duty officer looked up, half angry, half afraid. "Who?" "Falcon Flight, sir." The officer hesitated, then picked up the field phone and barked to the tower, "Turn on the bloody lights." The runway lit up like a beacon through the storm, long streaks of rain slashing through the glow. For nearly 3 minutes, everyone in the tower watched, holding their breath. Then came the sound, faint but real. The whine of Merlin engines cutting through the wind. 3 of them. approaching from the north. The radar confirmed it again. 3 inbound signatures descending to land. Through the rain, the control tower's binoculars caught faint silhouettes. 3 aircraft flying tight, steady, barely 50 feet off the deck. No lights, no signals, no tail flashes visible. They passed directly over the field, engines screaming, then disappeared into the storm. Not one of them touched down. Not one of them appeared again on radar. The hangar doors shook as the sound faded over the cliffs. When morning came, the storm was gone. The airfield was drenched in salt spray, the runway littered with debris. And there, just past the control tower, 3 sets of fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the mud, but only for 10 meters. Then they stopped. The following day, the chaplain found Morrison's notebook sitting on the altar inside the base chapel. The last page was filled in now, the handwriting unmistakable. The sky remembers us, so must you. No one admitted to placing it there. The base commander locked the notebook away, ordering the incident stricken from all logs. But that night, Ellis and 2 others stayed in the tower long after curfew. At 23:03, they heard the sound again, faint, distant, rising from the sea. This time, nobody reached for the radio. They just stood by the window, staring into the dark, listening as the lost patrol circled once more over an island that refused to forget them. From then on, the radar was turned off every night at 23 hours sharp. It wasn't an order, just something the men did. Some said it was superstition. Others said it was respect. But in the silent minutes before midnight, if the wind was right, they swore you could still hear it. 3 engines, steady and unbroken, echoing from the horizon. By the end of November, Ta Kali airfield had fallen quiet. The raids had moved north, and the Luftwaffe had shifted its fury elsewhere. What remained of the 1435 Squadron was folded into another command, its surviving pilots reassigned to other fronts. The base chaplain, Father Hargreaves, requested one final service before leaving the island, a memorial for all airmen lost over Malta's skies. It was held at dusk in the ruins of an old stone church near the cliffs, the sea whispering below. The surviving pilots stood in silence as the chaplain read the roll call. When he reached Reed's name, a low hum passed over the gathering, faint, steady, unmistakable, the sound of engines. Every head turned upward. The sky was clear, gold with dying light, but the sound persisted. It rose, faded, and then vanished as though swallowed by the wind. No one spoke. The chaplain simply closed his book and said, "Let them go." Weeks later, in December, a British reconnaissance aircraft photographing the northern coastline of Malta captured something strange. In one frame, just one, the faint outline of 3 aircraft appeared in the clouds, perfectly in formation, flying west. The negatives were sent to Cairo for review, where analysts labeled the phenomenon light refraction anomaly. The file was sealed, and the photo quietly misplaced. But the pilots who had served on Malta remembered. They spoke of it only in bars years later, when the war was over and the nightmares had dulled. The Echo Flight, they called it, the men who never landed, whose patrol still circled somewhere between the living and the dead. In 1967, a group of divers exploring a wreck site off Gozo discovered the remains of 3 aircraft resting side by side on the seabed, preserved in sand and coral. The serial numbers matched Reed, Harris, and Boyd. Inside, one cockpit, the control stick was locked in position, as if frozen mid-flight. In another, a rusted compass still pointed north, directly toward Malta. When the divers surfaced, one of them swore he heard the faint buzz of propellers overhead. The sky was empty. The artifacts were sent to a museum in Valletta, displayed under glass with little explanation. Visitors who stand before the exhibit sometimes claim they can hear static from the old radio set beside it. The curators dismiss it as ambient noise from the speakers. Yet, when one researcher restored the recording device found near the wreck, he discovered a final transmission buried beneath layers of distortion. 3 words repeated again and again in a calm, steady voice, returning to base. And every year, on the night of September 18th, Ta Kali's radar station, now a museum, flickers for exactly 4 minutes at 23:03. 3 blips appear on the old green screen, moving slowly across the north vector, before fading into silence. The attendants log it as a technical glitch, but those who know the story say it differently. They say the men of Falcon Flight still patrol the Maltese sky, their engines echoing through time, bound by duty, memory, and the promise they once made to one another. Because the sea forgets, the earth buries, but the sky remembers. Inspired by accounts from RAF pilots stationed on Malta during WLE and unexplained radar incidents recorded in late 1942. While the Ghost Patrol remains unverified, veterans' reports from Ta Kali and Lucca describe similar unexplained events for years after the war.